Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Alicia Walls, the Chief Operating Officer here at the Washington County Community Foundation, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session, Creating an Effective Fundraising Plan. We had a wonderful response to the Zoom seminar, so I can only imagine that all of you are planning ahead to next year, thinking to 2022, and trying to come up with some ways to help your organization successfully fundraise. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you're not already on mute, please mute your microphone during the session unless you are speaking. It helps to create a better experience for everybody on the call. Additionally, I'll be monitoring the chat box throughout the session. So if you have a question at any point, please type it in the chat and I'll be sure to ask it to Rob. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end to present your questions. If it's relevant to what we're talking at the time, please just drop it in the chat box and we will make sure we get it asked. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Rob DeOrio. Rob brings 29 years of experience in working for and with nonprofit organizations, helping them build capacity, grow fundraising, sustain operations, and raise more than $180 million. Rob began his fundraising career in 1990 with A. Al Brauman Associates, serving the American Ireland Fund, Historical Society of Western PA, and Life's Work. Subsequently, he served as the Director of Development and Planned Giving at the Senator John Heinz History Center for 14 years, where he was actively involved in 2 major capital campaigns and an endowment campaign, was a successful grants writer and event planner, and had an expanded role in business operations and financial oversight. Rob joined A.L. Brauman Associates in 2006 as their senior consultant, institutional advancement, and was elevated to vice president in 2009 and chief operating officer in 2011. In 2013, he founded the DeOrio Strategies Group. So with that, Rob, I'm going to hand things over to you. Thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. And thanks to Betsy and the Community Foundation for having me. And thank you all for taking time to join us here today. I know there are a few things more compelling in life than watching somebody talk about fundraising. So hopefully we'll make this an enjoyable hour here. So today we're going to talk about the importance of having an annual fund and walk through, or an annual fundraising plan, and talk about some steps of how to create one for your organization. One thing I always start with when doing any presentation is to mention that there's no one size fits all model for anything business related. There were 63-ish people that registered for this webinar. There are more than 50 different organizations represented. Each of you is different. Each of you have your own unique circumstances. The challenge is to take what we're talking about today and adapt it to your own organization and what works best. So we're going to talk really in generalities. As Alicia said, we'll be more than happy to answer questions as we go along. I also know that it is difficult to ask questions sometimes in a group this big. So I'm more than happy to talk to any of you, after the webinar here in the coming days or weeks. My email address and my cell number will be at the end of the presentation, so please don't hesitate to reach out. So let me get the PowerPoint going here. Okay, so when we talk about a fundraising plan, it is really, I think, one of the most important things that nonprofit businesses of all size can do. My largest current client has an annual budget of about $10 million. My smallest current client has an annual operating budget of about $125,000. Obviously, very, very different organizations. They each have a fundraising plan. Each of their fundraising plans looks very, very different to fit their own organizations. The larger organization has multiple initiatives going at any one time. They really use their plan to keep them organized and keep them to a timetable. The smaller organization has a couple of part-time staff, is largely volunteer driven. So they use the plan really to keep them focused and on task, since there's really nobody there, to think about these things, on regular business days throughout the whole week. So it keeps them organized when they come back to revisit it once or twice, a month. So when we talk about, there we go. When we talk about fundraising planning, what we're really talking about is the revenue side of your business plan. And this is something I always put up, and if those of you that know me, and I know there are several of you on the call probably are tired of hearing me say this, but think like a business because you are a business. I've had people tell me over the years, and I've been preaching this for many, many years, and I've had people come up to me after and say, well, we're really not a business, we're a nonprofit. Well, that does not mean you can't operate yourself like a business, shouldn't be operating yourself like a business. I've even had someone come up to me and say, well, it's hard for us to plan year to year because we're not allowed to make money. That's simply, I hope everybody knows that that's simply not true. Just because you're set up as a not-for-profit or not profit-driven doesn't mean that you're not allowed to make money. You provide invaluable services to the community. You may not be producing products, but you're certainly providing community benefit and community services. And regardless of how well-meaning or benevolent any business is, if they lose money year after year after year, they're not going to be around very long. So one of our challenges when we talk about thinking like a business and thinking like business planning, and on the revenue side when we talk about fundraising, is really changing the mindset within our own organizations. So creating an annual fundraising plan is really a natural extension of your budgeting process. Hopefully 1 to 2 months before the end of your fiscal year, as you're planning for your next fiscal year, you're doing your budgeting. So you're doing a lot of, and I know just from, as Alicia said, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm in my 30th year of doing this. I spent 14 years in a nonprofit, 16 years as a consultant. So I've seen many, many different things. And I also know that when budgeting time comes around, a lot of it is focused on expenses. But we need to spend as much time understanding our revenue streams, and especially in our fundraising side, as we do. So why is it important for a fundraising plan? Why do we need one of these? Well, first, it aligns your organizational goals. Of course, everything should be mission driven. Every fundraising impacts and is impacted by everything that you're doing within the organization. So when we talk about organizational goals and aligning goals, we're really talking about getting everybody on the same page from all departments. This just isn't fundraising. This is your program department. If you're a museum, your exhibits department, your finance department, your marketing department. It's getting everybody on the same page so that you as a fundraiser can adequately plan what you're doing for that year. What do I need to raise money for? What sponsorship opportunities are going to be coming down the pipe that maybe I'm not thinking about yet? How do we work this all into everything else that we're doing? Setting your priorities, focusing. So we talk about focusing your work plan, planning out your yearly calendar and your strategies and tactics. This really is what gives you a complete picture of all of your fundraising activities and the timing for that. It just allows you as a fundraiser to think about, think a little bit broader and a little bit bigger about where your fundraising program is going, how you're approaching donors, the pros and cons of each of your strategies. It also, and I actually took this out because somebody told me it was bad luck to type it one time, so I took it out, but I'm going to say it. It also protects you against employee turnover. I can't tell you how many times that, and I'm been as guilty as this as anybody else, where, you know, there's one employee that has all of the information in their heads, and then that employee leaves. Okay, now what? Especially for smaller organizations. You know, you kind of find yourself then in a position of trying to scramble and figure out, all right, what were we doing? You know, there's no plan. We don't know when grants are due. Where are we with maybe an event? Getting all this stuff down on paper, you know, guards you against that. It gets all that institutional knowledge in the organization where it really belongs, and out of, you know, the having to rely on one employee who maybe knows everything and then all of a sudden is gone. And as we all know, nonprofits can rarely afford to lose months of work trying to recreate the wheel, you know, when we know the pressures of raising money continue on an annual basis. And then it ensures that our activities are efficient and effective. And as we know, again, having done this for many years in a nonprofit setting, nonprofit employees are generally overworked and underpaid. So, you know, the last thing you want is to be inefficient with what you're doing. There's always a million other things to do. So if we can package our fundraising program in a way that allows us to be more efficient and be more effective, that's only going to benefit us as employees in the long run. When you then start to step back and think about your fundraising revenue, it often opens up new ideas, new ways to raise money, diversifying our fundraising revenue, which is very, very important, obviously, to a nonprofit. Being able to lessen our reliability on one revenue stream, which, you know, we've seen over the years, and we saw it years ago with when government funding was scaled way back. We've seen it when you know, the markets go down and perhaps donors cut back on giving. If you're relying on one revenue stream and that revenue stream all of a sudden you know, is now not there, or much less than you had anticipated, and you're not planned for other things, then you're left scrambling, and that's never a good place to be. Which leads us into the next thing, shifting the organization from reactive mode to proactive mode. You know, the I'll figure it out as I go approach really puts you into perpetual reactive mode. You know, if your goal is to maintain the status quo or regress, then reactive mode is absolutely for you. But your organization will never see growth if your fundraising program is constantly reacting to situations versus proactively seeking out ways to grow your revenue streams. Limiting our crisis fundraising, our last minute fundraising through our planning, helping to create a culture of fundraising. And you may have heard of the culture of fundraising, or culture of philanthropy, it's sometimes called. You know, fundraising doesn't operate in a silo. As I said, it impacts and is impacted by everything else that's happening within your organization. Everyone in your organization plays some role in fundraising, in relationship building, and stewardship. You know, that goes from staff and volunteers to your board members and even some of your major donors. You know, so figuring out what roles these groups play. Do they understand their roles? How can we engage with them further? How can we engage with our community further? Something as simple as, how long does it take for us to send out a thank you letter? You know, a fundraising plan sort of, you know, again, it professionalizes your fundraising operation. It gets people to think more about fundraising, think more about the culture of fundraising within your organization, and furthers the importance of fundraising within your organization. Forces an analysis of your fundraising programs, your costs, and again, you're a business. What's your return on investment? Again, something that we often just don't have the time necessarily to do, but is really critical in our future planning when we talk about our fundraising. You know, especially events. When we talk about, as this certainly applies to all, but I'll use events as an example because it's really the easiest one. You know, a common mistake, for example, when you're reviewing your special events is not to include staff costs in the event. So, you know, you get to the end of the event and you say, okay, well, we made $25,000. Fantastic. We're really thrilled with that. Except that when you then go back and say, okay, well, it took a staff member 6 months to organize this, and we pay that staff member X, that has to come off. You know, it really doesn't give you a true picture of what your net really is. So, you know, when you think about analyzing your fundraising programs, and this doesn't have to be overly complicated, it's just looking at what are the true costs of these things we're doing. What's our return on investment? Sometimes it's fantastic and you don't want to change anything, but oftentimes you find, okay, well, look, maybe if we did things a different way, we could reduce our costs, get a greater return. Maybe we're focusing on the wrong areas. Maybe if we spent more time, you know, on major gift development, we'd have a much greater return on investment than if we're focusing on, you know, 4 or 5 small events throughout the year that are only generating a couple of $1,000s. So thinking about how fundraising fits into that overall financial picture. Again, our goal is to be as efficient and as effective as we can be. And then finally, you know, building confidence in the fundraising program and in the organization. You know, one of the most common questions I get, and I'll bet you 99% of the time, is how can we get our board more involved in fundraising? You know, we have a terrific board, they're dedicated, they're great people, but they don't participate in fundraising, or maybe only one or two of them participate in fundraising. How do we get them more involved? Well, you know, a fundraising plan is not going to solve all your issues. I think there's 3 or 4 real critical things to do that, but a fundraising plan is a big piece of getting your board involved. You know, it'll provide a better understanding of their roles in fundraising. It gives them a clearer picture of the needs and the strategies of fundraising, helps them understand the process, and by understanding the process, it can help them develop ways to participate. Fundraising is you know, you talk to fundraising and about fundraising, and a lot of people think, okay, well, I got to take a hat around to my neighbors' doors and, you know, knock on the doors and ask for donations. And we all know that that's not what we're talking about when we talk about fundraising. Fundraising is a process, and there are many ways of participating in that process without actually asking for money. And having a fundraising plan allows you to open up that conversation with your board members to get them more involved in that process. And then externally, you know, when we talk to funders, you know, you're always hearing about capacity building, and sustainability. Well, what better way to instill confidence in fundraisers and funders than saying, hey, we have a plan. We're not making this up as we go along. We're not reacting to the fundraising idea of the day. We have a set plan. We know where we want to go with this program this year, which will lead us to where we want to go with it next year. And it just builds off itself. So, you know, letting them know that you are thinking strategically about capacity, about sustainability of your organization, and about future growth. And then it's been proven time and time again that having a fundraising plan will help you raise more money. It's just a simple fact. AFP has done a study, Forward Source has done a study. I'm sure there have been others. Everybody says the same thing. Having a plan will ultimately help you raise more money. It gives you a better handle on what you're doing. Again, it gives you that analysis of what's working and what's not working, and allows you to adequately plan accordingly. So before we sort of jump into the next couple of slides, Alicia, were there any questions that we want to address at this point, or should I just keep rolling on?
No questions yet, so keep rolling.
Okay. So one of the things I want to share with you, we're going to talk a little bit about here in a little bit, is about understanding your funding sources and understanding trends in funding. So I wanted to share a couple of slides with you. These are from Giving USA 2021, which shows giving in the year 2020. Of course, the pandemic had a major impact on charitable giving, on where dollars were going within charitable organizations. So, it's important to see these trends when you're thinking about your donors, thinking about your prospects, and how they may potentially impact some of your funding sources. So in 2020, there were $471.5 billion contributed to charitable organizations. These are by source. You can see that individuals by far were the largest source of those contributions at 69%, followed by foundations at 19%, bequests at 9%, and corporations at 4%. So individual giving, while it was 69%, that actually increased about 2% from 2019. Foundation giving was up 17% from 2019. I think, again, in reaction to the pandemic, a lot of foundations stepped up. They dipped into their coffers. They gave more than what they normally would. Bequests were up about 10%, and corporate giving, unsurprisingly, was down about 6% in last year. But overall, contributions in 2020 were up 5.1% from 2019. So, while at the beginning of the pandemic, I know there was a lot of worry in nonprofits about contributed funds, especially with the way the market reacted initially. But contributions did increase. I think what we saw is that people really stepped up and supported organizations that they believed in. They stepped up to help their community. Individual giving, even at 69%, really, especially in Western Pennsylvania, because we are so blessed with so many foundations and even large corporations that give. Individual giving, really, there's so much potential for individual giving in nationally, certainly, but in our area. As I said, foundation giving was way up. We know a lot of those were one-time gifts to help organizations get through some rough spots, maybe organizations that had a large influx of clients, or their programs had to expand immediately in reaction to the pandemic. So I would expect that to come back down a little bit in the coming years. And bequests continue to be a sort of it's kind of a pet peeve of mine whenever I talk to organizations and they don't have a planned giving program in place. Bequests are 9%, almost $42 billion in bequests in 2020. It's another really untapped market for nonprofits. And if you don't have a formal planned giving program, I really would encourage you to look into ways to start doing that, or at least start talking to your donors about planned gifts.
Rob, we have a question in the chat.
Yep.
on
Sure.
the last slide, and it is, do you know if small businesses were incorporated in the stat for corporations?
Yeah, so yes, so unless they were, I guess it depends on how they're registered. If they're registered as sole proprietors, they're included in individuals. If they're registered as LLCs, S corps, those sorts of things, they're included in corporation. So this next, the next chart that I wanted to share just shows where the money went. Again, a lot of these had increases from 2019. The biggest chunk you can see is religion at 28%, followed by education. Human services was up 9.7% over 2019, which again is not surprising given the reaction to the pandemic. Public society benefit was up 15.7%. They define that as research facilities, community development organizations, United Ways, human and civil rights organizations. Health, interestingly, was down a little bit, but the biggest hit came to arts and culture. They were down 7.5% from 2019. So again, even though dollars were generally up, people tended to react to the effects of the pandemic and in some cases adjusted where their dollars were actually going. So again, I just wanted to share that as a way to say, understanding where the trends are, where they're going to be going, probably at least one more year, especially with corporate giving. I would say we're probably looking at at least 2 years until we see that start to come back. And of course, the infrastructure package that the feds continue to talk about will have an impact on charitable giving as well, depending upon where those dollars go. If corporations benefit from those dollars right away, we might see corporate giving increase a little bit. But these are things that, again, we need to be on our radar. We need to be thinking about as we look at our future planning. So getting into actually the fundraising plan, what are we doing here? And quite frankly, I think a lot of this is probably common sense. A lot of this is stuff that you probably have in your head, especially as fundraisers, that we just need to kind of get out of our heads and put on paper and get some other people involved in the process. But, step one is just analysis. Start with your end game. Well, how much money do you need to raise? What are we talking about here? And when I talk about an annual fundraising plan, I'm not just talking about an annual fund for general operating. I'm saying, okay, how much, if say you're on a calendar year, for argument's sake, how much money do we need in 2022? Between general operating, do we have some capital needs? Do we have, like computers that are down that we need to replace? Do we have some program expansion that if we can find money for, what's our total dollar amount that we're looking at raising, in our next fiscal year? Because each of those things will have an impact on your strategies, on your donors. So thinking about your current, and how does fundraising fit into all of that? And, a lot of you have other revenue streams. I know a lot of smaller organizations, really, fundraising is a large part of what you're doing. But how does fundraising interact with your other, do you have admissions? Do you have membership? Do you charge program fees? Do you get government monies? How does fundraising fit into your overall financial plan? So what are your current fundraising strategies? Is it all grant writing? Do you have events? Do you have a major gifts program? And if not, should you have a major gifts program? Thinking about your strategies then in terms of how to reach your overall goal. Again, we talked a little bit about what works and why, what doesn't work and why. This is really the time to ask those tough questions. Why are we doing this? Why do we do things this way? You know, it's hard to change that thinking of, well, this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way we're going to keep doing it. Again, it's for some organizations that's perfectly fine, and that works. But a lot of times, if your program side, if your constituent side is evolving, your fundraising program needs to evolve also. And this is where you have to ask those tough questions and say, okay, well, you know, even though it's working, how can it grow? How can we change what we're doing or tweak what we're doing to best support our mission and our mission related programs? New opportunities that exist, you know, again, you don't necessarily have to have them all spelled out when you do the plan, but knowing, okay, here are things that we think might be coming down the road. You know, here's a new grant opportunity. Some of you probably just applied for a Pennsylvania Humanities grant, the SHARP grant that sort of just came up, and then they had like a real quick deadline and turnaround. It's those sorts of opportunities that you need to be aware of and need to be prepared to take advantage of, that having that plan kind of, you know, if you don't have a plan, a lot of times you're flat-footed and, okay, well, there's this opportunity, but we can't react to it because we just don't have the time. And then again, as we just talked about, what factors exist that could impact your fundraising effort with the economy, with things that other organizations, you know, if another similar organization is launching some big capital campaign and you have similar donor bases, is that going to impact you? So knowing what's going on in your community and how that impacts your fundraising efforts. Steps 2 and 3 can really be flip-flopped. I like to do them in this order. You know, it's really a personal preference. But then I say, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's how much we need. What are our funding sources? You know, who do we rely on? Do we have a balanced portfolio of funding sources? You know, do we get money from sort of all the major categories here, or are we over reliant on, you know, a certain category of funder? So, you know, it's the who will we ask, when will we ask, what's our timing for these things? Are we talking about new donors, recurring donors? How do we acquire new donors? And I think it's important to set target goals there too. Have some sort of qualitative or quantitative measurements so that you can really track where you're going and whether things are actually working. And also, you know, it gives you the ability then to further understand your donors, which are reliable year to year. You know, who can we count on, you know, every year to give X dollars, and can that number be bumped up? We know there are foundations that give every other year, so you have to take that into consideration in your budgeting process. Sometimes there are one-time gifts for certain things, and those become a little less reliable as to whether we can convert those to annual gifts. So understanding your donors, understanding where your money comes from, and that your future donors, those that you're cultivating, those new donors that you're trying to bring into the fold, are going to demographically look a lot like your current donors. So if you can understand your current donor base, it gives you a better understanding of where to look for new donors. And then developing those prospect lists and timetables so you have it. Again, it's you know, one of the easiest things to do is to say, okay, I'm going to take 8 donors to lunch this month, and then next month rolls around and you say, okay, the 8 donors I was going to take last month, I'm going to take this month, and then that we know how that cycle works. It's common in nonprofits. It's nobody's fault, certainly, because of, again, we're generally overworked and understaffed. But if you can develop your prospect list, develop timetables, and set up a method of accountability, it will usually help you in the long run stick to that. Identifying your priorities. So what are you raising the money for? Is it all general operating? Are there some special project initiatives mixed in? Is there program money? Do you need some capital money? Or, if you're fortunate enough to think about raising endowment monies. So identifying, where or what that money is going to be for. Again, each of these impacts the other. So because there's going to be donor crossover. And there's going to be donors that you say, look, they give operating dollars every year. They would be perfect for a capital gift. How do we approach them for both? So being able to think about that in advance. Setting dollar goals, certainly for each of those priorities. And fundraising, really should support and complement the goals of your strategic plan. So again, everything is mission driven. Hopefully everything is driven by the goals of your strategic plan. And then be realistic, at least in your first step as a fundraiser, as a development office, be realistic. I know that oftentimes the expense side is higher than the revenue side when you do your initial budget. I also can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, we're about 150,000 short, dump it into fundraising. Somebody will write a grant for that. Have an event, sell some cupcakes. That's, if you can at least start with a realistic number and be able to, provide an argument in terms of budget development that, look, this is where we think we are, this is what we're comfortable with. It at least opens up that conversation further, so that when money eventually does, and it always does, get dumped into fundraising as a goal, it gives you a starting point anyway for that thought process. So step 4 then is matching up steps 2 and 3. What prospects fit the best fit the funding priorities. Again, identifying your strategies. This goes all the way from cultivation. When we talk about fundraising strategies, we're not just talking about asking, for the money. We're talking about the cultivation process. We're talking about the solicitation process, relationship building. And this is a good way to, again, bring your board in. We're talking about relationship building here. Who has connections? Who can make introductions? Who's willing to sit in a meeting with us? And then what resources exist to support that? Do you have, again, your board? Do you have an advisory committee? Other donors are really often an overlooked really gem when it comes to supporting your fundraising program. These are people that generally believe in your mission, especially longtime donors, and will oftentimes engage with you and help you think about ways to connect to the community, to other people that they know. Government officials, if you use, fundraising council, et cetera, all there to support your fundraising efforts. And then, what are your assets? Is it your name? Do you have name recognition? Do you have a compelling mission? Are your board members well known in the community, or are your staff members well known in the community? How do you, how do you utilize those assets to support what you're doing as part of implementing your plan? And then identifying your tools. Do you have a case statement written? Most places do, and just don't call it a case statement. If you're writing grants, you have a general case statement scoped out. But what's your messaging? What are your impact and what are your outcomes on the community, on your constituents? Do you have client stories that you can share? What's the personal connections that are really going to pull people in to what you're doing? How do you tell your story? I know the Community Foundation website, and I apologize, I don't remember the exact name of it, but you have a great link that has stories about organizations. How are you telling your story to the community? What are you putting out there? How are people understanding who you are and what your role is in the community?
Rob, that website is the Heart of Giving Charity Storybook.
Okay, thank you.
If anyone would like to check it out, it's a great resource.
It really is. There are some terrific stories on there. And then finally, just go do it. You've got your plan, whether it's a 10-page narrative or 2 pages of bullet points or a couple of charts, you've got a plan. And that's the important thing. It's a living document. This is not something that you're going to write today and it's going to look exactly the same in 6 months. It is going to evolve. There are going to be things that come up throughout the year that you didn't expect. There are going to be opportunities that come up. It will evolve throughout the year, but it hopefully gives you then some measurable goals and objectives. And you should be able to use it to guide your annual activities of your development department. It really becomes most people will have a daily to-do list. This is really your annual to-do list when it comes to fundraising. But it does require discipline. I say this when I talk about strategic plans, and I say this when I talk about fundraising plans. You need to use them. You can't write them and put them on a shelf. If you're doing that, then you've basically wasted your time. These are things that should be out, that you should be reviewing at department meetings, that you should be reviewing at board meetings, keeping people involved, and making that fundraising plan active and making it work for you. So again, though, it will change. Nothing moves in a straight line. Be flexible. Challenges, again, slow you down, take you off course. They're going to happen. Those of you that are in your office right now, when you drive home tonight, I'll bet every single one of you hit some sort of road construction. It's everywhere. Does that mean you sleep in your car and say, I'm not going to drive home? No, you still want to get home. It's just, okay, maybe it takes you a little bit longer because of traffic. Maybe you have to take a detour. But ultimately, you're going to get to where you set out to go. Same thing with your fundraising plan. You're going to hit detours. You're going to have things come up that are going to slow you down. Stay focused on that ultimate goal and make course corrections as needed. And then again, unexpected opportunities. Take advantage of them, work them into your plan. When you have a plan and you know what's coming down the pike over the next months or 2 months and an unexpected opportunity comes up, it's much easier to take advantage of that, to work that into what you're already doing than if you don't have a plan. So that's pretty much it, I think. Again, it's one of those things, and again, here's my cell number and my email address. I really mean it when I say do not hesitate to call or shoot me an email, if you have specific questions or just want to chat generally about your organization. But, having a fundraising plan, in my opinion, is really one of the most important things that an organization can do. I know there are several of you on this webinar today that I've worked with to get development plans, fundraising plans in place, and I believe that they are working well, and that you've been able to move your organization ahead because of it. But I am happy to address any questions or comments or whatever.
We have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Rob, could you speak a little bit as far as like structuring the plan in terms of timeline? Do you have a recommendation? I know here at the Community Foundation, we use like a monthly approach.
Yeah, I like to use a monthly approach as well. I think it allows you to plug in, pretty much everything that you need. Your foundation deadlines, and hopefully, if you have a foundation deadline due in December, that starts to appear on your calendar in October, so that you can start working on it. course, then I know that means you bump it off till November and bump it off till December and write it at the last minute, but at least it's on the plan for October, and maybe you're addressing it sooner. But I like the monthly setup best. Of course, there will be things, if you do an event, for example, the event may be in May, and then you have maybe a more detailed timeline for your event schedule leading up to that. But I think it's the easiest one to look at as a big picture in terms of everything that you're doing and the timing of everything that you're doing.
Thanks. Another question is, we seem to always need more general operating capital. How do we make that an attractive give for funders?
Well, again, I think it's how you tell your story. It's what's your mission? You know, what benefits are you bringing to the community? You know, of course, again, there's 50 different organizations here, so this is going to mean something different to each one of you. You know, for example, if you have, let's say you're a health and human service agency, and you can use direct client stories of the impact that your programs have had on individuals' lives, you know, that can be a really powerful way to tell your story. You know, if you're an arts and humanities group, the same thing. You know, is it school children that we're reaching and exposing them to things that maybe they're not getting in the classroom? You know, how do we reach out and how are we an active member of our community? What role do we play in the community? So I think, you know, we tend to get caught up in, you know, thinking that because people know we exist, that they know everything about us. And that's simply not the case. It's, you know, not to pick on Alicia and the Community Foundation, but you guys, how many organizations do you fund a year? Hundreds, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, well over 100.
Right. And you would say that you know something about each of those organizations because you fund them and they send in grant proposals. But that doesn't mean you're thinking about them every single day. And that doesn't mean that each of those hundreds of organizations, you intimately know what they're doing or know the impact of what they're doing, you know, necessarily off the top of your head. So I think I think we tend to take for granted maybe sometimes what we as nonprofits bring to the community. We tend to be a little too humble. And we tend to have an inferiority complex, quite frankly. You know, we tend to be apologetic when we're asking for money. We need to be able to say, hey, look at us. Here's what we do. Here's the value that we bring to our community, to our constituents, and here's the impact that we're having.
One other question here in regards to the humanities grant you mentioned, where does one find out about these last minute opportunities?
Well, I think just, you know, signing up for newsletters. I know the last thing we need is more emails coming into our inboxes, but go to the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, make sure you're signed up for their, you know, their notifications. Grant Makers of Western Pennsylvania, make sure you're on their email list. You know, there are various others that you can sign up for. So I think, you know, that's really how you find out a lot. And hopefully your board members are doing the same thing. So the one of the organizations that I work with, we found out the day before the notification for the SHARP grant went out because one of the board members found out from somebody they knew who was on the board of the Pennsylvania Humanities Council. So not that it really gave us any, you know, it gave us a heads up at least that it was coming and to look for the email, but you know, that's really the best way, is just to make sure that you know, you're getting these notifications from the larger state organizations and that you're signed up for these, whether they're newsletters or just notifications coming in. I know that the Community Foundation does a great job of in their communications sending out notifications ahead of time when there are grant opportunities coming along. So. Well,
those are all the questions that we have. I Thanks again, Rob. That was great information. We have recorded this presentation, as you know, and we'll be posting it to the charity bulletin board. So if you'd like to refer back to any of the content that was shared today, please look for that information. It'll be available to you. I'm getting lots of thanks in the chat. So we're looking forward to seeing everybody put these fundraising plans into action. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for attending.
Yeah, thank you all.